The world's oldest dog gives birth to 17 puppies, but one wasn't a dog. At first it looks like a miracle, an unbelievable story that everyone wants to celebrate. But when a young vet takes a closer look, something feels wrong. One of the newborns isn't just different, it's something that should never have been there. What begins as a heartwarming moment turns into a dangerous fight for truth. Because behind the cameras, behind the fame, lies a secret powerful people will do anything to keep hidden. Threats, lies, even deadly risks, all to cover up one impossible birth. Now the question is, if one of those puppies isn't a dog, then what is it? And how far will the powerful go to silence the only person who dares to find out? I'd love to know. Where are you watching from? Type it down below, and while you're here, subscribe so you'll always catch the next story. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Braddock Ranch as Greer Larkin's truck kicked up dust along the winding driveway. Her phone had buzzed with an urgent call just 20 minutes earlier. Bluebell, the ranch's prized hound and supposed world's oldest dog, had gone into unexpected labor. Greer's heart raced as she parked outside the sprawling ranch house. She'd seen plenty of difficult births in her years as a veterinary nurse, but something about this call felt different. Through the open barn doors, she could hear the distressed whimpers of a dog in pain. "Thank goodness you're here." A ranch hand waved her toward the barn. "She's been like this for hours." Inside, Greer found Bluebell lying on her side in a hay-filled stall, her frail body trembling with each contraction. The elderly hound's clouded eyes looked up at Greer with trust and exhaustion. Something wasn't right. Bluebell seemed far too old to be pregnant. "How did this happen?" Greer asked, kneeling beside the dog and quickly pulling supplies from her medical bag. "She must be at least 15 years old." "Mr. Braddock says she's 25. The handler replied proudly. "Oldest dog in the world." Greer bit back her skepticism and focused on her patient. Bluebell's labor was clearly complicated. The first puppy was struggling to emerge. With gentle but firm hands, Greer helped guide the tiny creature into the world, clearing its airways and massaging it until a healthy cry pierced the air. 2 more puppies followed, each one requiring careful assistance. But it was the 4th puppy that made Greer pause. As she cleaned it off, she noticed its markings were oddly different from its siblings. The smell, too, was wrong. Not the sweet scent of a newborn puppy, but something sharper, almost chemical. "Something's not right here," Greer muttered, examining the puppy more closely. Its movements were jerky, unnatural. The handler suddenly stepped forward, his boots crunching in the hay. "Here," he said gruffly, pulling an envelope from his jacket. $5,000. Just sign this paper saying you were never here today." Greer stared at the offered envelope, then at the non-disclosure agreement being thrust toward her. The implications hit her like a physical blow. They were trying to hide something about Bluebell and these puppies. "No," she said firmly, standing up. "I won't sign anything. And I think we need to have a serious discussion about what's really going on here." The handler's face darkened. "Miss Larkin, Mr. Braddock is a powerful man in these parts. You really don't want to make trouble." "I'm not making trouble," Greer replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I'm doing my job, protecting animals, and something is very wrong with this situation." She gathered her supplies, making careful notes about the strange puppy's condition. Bluebell watched her with those tired eyes, and Greer felt a surge of protective anger. Whatever was happening here, whatever scheme Braddock was running with his world's oldest dog, it stopped now. "You'll regret this," the handler called after her as she walked toward her truck. "Nobody crosses Orson Braddock." Greer's hands shook as she started her engine, but her resolve was firm. She had sworn an oath to protect animals, and she wouldn't let money or threats stop her from uncovering the truth about Bluebell and her mysterious puppies. As she drove away from Braddock Ranch, she knew she had just stepped into something much bigger and much more dangerous than a simple difficult birth. The strange puppy's unnatural movements and chemical smell haunted her thoughts. What exactly was Braddock trying to hide? And how far would he go to keep his secrets? One thing was certain. Her refusal to sign that non-disclosure agreement had set something in motion, something that would change everything. In her rearview mirror, the grand silhouette of Braddock Ranch grew smaller, but Greer knew this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of a battle between one determined veterinary nurse and a powerful man who thought his money could buy anything, including silence. The morning after her confrontation at Braddock Ranch, Greer arrived at the Cedar Valley Veterinary Clinic to find Dr. Matthews waiting at the front desk with an unusually stern expression. Her stomach dropped when she saw the clinic's owner, a normally cheerful man, looking so grave. "Greer, we need to talk in my office," he said quietly, avoiding her eyes. Following him down the sterile hallway, Greer's mind raced. The examination room doors were all closed, unusual for this early hour. The silence felt heavy, broken only by their footsteps on the linoleum floor. Once inside his office, Dr. Matthews sank into his chair with a deep sigh. "I received a very concerning call this morning from Orson Braddock. He claims you violated client confidentiality and made unfounded accusations about his breeding program." "That's not true," Greer protested, her hands gripping the arms of her chair. "I saw something wrong with that litter, Dr. Matthews. One of those puppies—" He held up his hand to stop her. "I'm sorry, Greer, but Mr. Braddock is not only our biggest client, he's also on the veterinary board. He's threatening to file a formal complaint that could jeopardize our entire practice." He slid a paper across his desk. "I have to suspend you, effective immediately, pending investigation." Greer stared at the suspension notice, her vision blurring. "You know me. You know I wouldn't make accusations without cause. I do know you," he said softly, "which is why this is temporary. But Greer, you're up against someone with tremendous influence. Be careful." Walking out of the clinic, clutching her personal belongings in a cardboard box, Greer felt numb. The spring morning that had seemed so promising just an hour ago now felt cold and hostile. She drove home in a daze, barely registering the familiar streets of Cedar Valley. As she climbed the stairs to her second-floor apartment, Mrs. Henderson from the building management office called out to her. The elderly woman's usually friendly face was pinched with distress. "Oh, Greer, dear, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but—" She wrung her hands. "We've received notice that your lease won't be renewed next month." Something about changed income requirements. Greer's box of belongings nearly slipped from her grasp. "What? But I've never missed a payment. I've lived here for 3 years." Mrs. Henderson looked miserable. "I know, dear. The order came from the property management company. Apparently, Mr. Braddock's investment group just bought the building." Stumbling into her apartment, Greer set down her box and sank onto her worn couch. Her hands were shaking as she pulled out her phone, scrolling through contacts. Who could she call? Who would believe her over someone like Orson Braddock? A knock at her door made her jump. Through the peephole, she saw her neighbor, Clemency Rowe, holding what appeared to be a casserole dish. "I thought you might need some comfort food," the retired teacher said when Greer opened the door. Her sharp green eyes took in Greer's defeated posture. "I saw you coming home early with that box." Trouble at work. Before Greer knew it, she was sitting at her small kitchen table across from her former biology teacher, pouring out the whole story. The strange puppy in Bluebell's litter, Braddock's attempt to buy her silence, and now the swift retaliation. Clemency listened intently, her silver bun catching the morning light. When Greer finished, the older woman's eyes gleamed with determination. "Well, we can't let him get away with this, can we?" "What can I do?" Greer asked. "He owns half the town." "He may own buildings, dear, but he doesn't own the truth." Clemency pulled a notebook from her bag. "Now tell me everything you noticed about that puppy. Every detail matters." As Greer described the peculiarities she'd observed, Clemency took careful notes. Her former teacher's methodical approach helped calm Greer's racing thoughts. "We need someone with official authority," Clemency mused. "Someone who can investigate without Braddock's interference." She snapped her fingers. "What about Harlan East?" the county animal control officer. I don't know him well, Greer admitted. Would he help? He's stubborn about following rules, but he's honest. And he's one of the few people in town Braddock can't fire. Clemency was already dialing her phone. Harlan. It's Clemency Rowe. Remember that favor you owe me for taking care of your mother's cat? Well, an hour later, Harlan East's county vehicle pulled up outside Greer's apartment building. The broad-shouldered officer approached them with cautious interest, his uniform crisp despite the warming day. Mrs. Rowe says you have concerns about animal welfare at Braddock Ranch, he said, his tone professional but guarded. You understand these are serious accusations? I know what I saw, Greer stated firmly. She described the delivery again, emphasizing the physical differences she'd noticed in the suspicious puppy. Something's not right with Bluebell's story either. A dog her supposed age shouldn't be able to breed. Harlan's weathered face remained neutral, but his eyes showed growing interest. I've had concerns about that operation for years, but Braddock's lawyers always block any serious investigation. Then help us find proof, Clemency urged. 3 heads are better than 1, especially when we each bring different expertise to the table. They gathered around Greer's kitchen table, spreading out papers and pulling up records on their phones. Clemency's research skills proved invaluable as she dug through online archives and veterinary journals. Look at this, she said, pointing to her tablet screen. Bluebell's first public appearance was just 2 years ago, but Braddock claims she's been with his family for decades. There's no documentation of her existence before 2021. Harlan nodded slowly. And I've noticed the ranch has been bringing in new hounds regularly, all similar looking. They could be cycling through dogs, maintaining the illusion of one long-lived animal. But why? Greer wondered. What's the point of this elaborate deception? Money, Clemency said grimly. Publicity. Braddock Ranch's tourism business exploded after they claimed to have the world's oldest dog, and their breeding program charges premium prices, supposedly selling puppies from this miracle bloodline. The puppy I saw, Greer said slowly. It wasn't just different. It seemed like it might not even be the same breed. Could they be mixing in other dogs to keep the breeding program going? Harlan pulled out his notebook. That would be fraud. If we can prove it, we'd have something solid to take to the authorities. He looked at Greer seriously. But gathering evidence won't be easy. Braddock's already shown he'll use his power to shut down anyone who threatens him. I've already lost my job and my apartment, Greer said, lifting her chin. I've got nothing left to lose. You've got us, Clemency corrected, patting her hand. Former teacher, vet nurse, and animal control officer. We make quite a team. As they continued planning, Greer felt something she hadn't since leaving the clinic that morning. Hope. Braddock might have wealth and influence on his side, but she had something possibly more valuable. Allies who believed in her and were willing to fight alongside her for the truth. Harlan spread out a map of the ranch property. I can do surprise inspections, but they'll be expecting that. We need to be smarter. I still have copies of Bluebell's recent medical records, Greer offered, and I took photos of the litter on my phone before they tried to make me sign that agreement. Perfect, Clemency said, her teacher's organizational skills coming to the fore. Harlan, you handle the official angle. I'll dig deeper into the historical records and publicity trail. Greer, you focus on the medical evidence. Between us, we'll find the proof we need. As the afternoon light slanted through her apartment windows, Greer looked at her unlikely allies, the cautious but principled officer and her sharp-minded former teacher, and felt strength returning to her spirit. Braddock might have thought he could silence her by taking away her livelihood and home, but he'd actually given her something powerful, a cause worth fighting for and people willing to stand beside her. We need to be careful, Harlan warned, his eyes serious. Braddock didn't get where he is by playing fair. No, Greer agreed, thinking of Bluebell and her strange litter. But neither did he count on facing all of us together. They worked into the evening, piecing together fragments of information like a complex puzzle. With each small discovery, the picture of Braddock's deception became clearer. He might have the power to crush one person, but 3 determined individuals working together. That was a force even Orson Braddock hadn't anticipated. As Harlan and Clemency finally prepared to leave, they made plans to meet again the next day. Standing in her soon-to-be former apartment, Greer felt a curious mix of anxiety and determination. She'd lost much today, but she'd gained something unexpected. A team of allies committed to exposing the truth, no matter the cost. "Remember," Clemency said at the door, her green eyes fierce behind her spectacles. "The biggest bullies often have the most to hide. We just need to find out exactly what that is." Harlan nodded gravely. "Stay alert, both of you. This is just the beginning." After they left, Greer stood at her window, watching them drive away. The setting sun painted Cedar Valley in shades of gold and purple, and for the first time since that morning, she felt truly ready for the fight ahead. Braddock might have money and influence, but she had something he couldn't buy: people who believed in her and the truth she was fighting to reveal. The sun had barely risen when Greer received an urgent text from Harlan East. Her phone buzzed against her kitchen counter as she prepared her morning coffee, the screen illuminating with a message that made her pause mid-pour. "3 dead coyotes found near Braddock's south fence line. Need your eyes on this." Greer's hands trembled slightly as she set down her coffee mug. The timing was too convenient to be coincidence. With Bluebell's unusual delivery still fresh in her mind, she grabbed her jacket and headed out. 20 minutes later, she pulled up beside Harlan's county animal control truck. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of wet grass and something less pleasant. Harlan stood waiting, his usually cheerful face drawn with concern. "Morning, Greer," he said, nodding toward a spot several yards away. "They're over there, found by a hiker early this morning." Together they walked to where 3 coyote carcasses lay in the tall grass. Greer knelt beside them, pulling on latex gloves from her kit. The animals showed no obvious signs of trauma, which made their deaths all the more suspicious. "No bullet wounds," she murmured, carefully examining each one. "No signs of fighting or disease either." These were healthy adults. Harlan crossed his arms. "That's what got my attention. Healthy coyotes don't just drop dead in clusters. Unless someone wanted them to," Greer added quietly. A thought was forming in her mind, connecting to the strange puppy from Bluebell's litter. "Harlan, I need to check something at the ranch." "Can you get these bodies to the county lab for testing?" "Already planned on it. What are you thinking?" "I'm not sure yet," she replied, though the pieces were starting to align in her mind. "But something's not right here." Back at Braddock Ranch, Greer parked her truck well away from the main house. She knew the morning shift change would leave a brief window when the handlers were switching posts. Sure enough, she managed to slip into the kennel area unnoticed. Bluebell lay in her pen, nursing her litter. The elderly hound looked up as Greer approached, her tail offering a weak wag of recognition. The puppies were sleeping in a warm pile against their mother's belly, all except one. The odd puppy that had caught Greer's attention during the delivery was actively squirming, making small, whimpering sounds unlike its siblings. With gentle hands, Greer lifted it for a closer look. "Let's see what you're hiding," she whispered, carefully examining the pup under the kennel's fluorescent lights. What she found made her breath catch. The pup's belly fur had an unusual tinge to it, the kind that came from livestock marking dye. It was subtle, mostly washed away, but unmistakable to someone who worked with farm animals. More telling was a small scar on its hindquarter, partially healed, and definitely not recent enough to have happened since birth. "You're not newborn at all, are you?" Greer murmured, her heart racing as the implications sank in. She'd seen enough coyote pups in her work to recognize the slightly different ear shape, the distinctive muzzle structure. This wasn't a dog puppy at all, it was a coyote pup, carefully selected and planted among Bluebell's genuine litter. The sound of voices outside sent Greer quickly returning the pup to its place. She slipped out through the back of the kennel, mind whirling with what she'd discovered. The dead coyotes, this planted pup. It pointed to something much bigger than just falsifying Bluebell's age for publicity. She drove straight to Clemency Rowe's house, knowing her former teacher would help her think this through. The retired woman answered her door in a flowered housecoat, taking one look at Greer's face before ushering her inside. "Sit down before you fall down," Clemency ordered, already moving to put on a pot of tea. "What's gotten you looking like you've seen a ghost?" Greer sank into a familiar armchair, gathering her thoughts. "Remember how I told you something was off about one of Bluebell's puppies?" "I think I know what it is now. It's not a puppy at all. It's a coyote pup." Clemency's hands stilled on the kettle. "Are you certain?" "As certain as I can be without DNA testing. And this morning, Harlan found 3 dead adult coyotes near Braddock's property. Healthy ones, with no obvious cause of death." "The parents," Clemency suggested, bringing 2 steaming mugs to the sitting area. Greer nodded. "That's what I'm thinking. Kill the adults, take the pup, and slip it into a prestigious litter where no one would think to look too closely. But why? What's the endgame here?" Clemency settled into her own chair, eyes sharp despite her age. "Think bigger, dear. Braddock Ranch isn't just about cattle anymore. It's become a media circus with Bluebell's world record status. All eyes are on them, which makes it the perfect cover for something else." "Illegal wildlife trafficking." Greer breathed, the pieces clicking into place. Use the publicity around Bluebell to distract from other activities. Who'd question unusual animal movements on a ranch that's constantly hosting media events and visitors? "Exactly," Clemency agreed. "And if someone started asking questions, they'd have Braddock's influence and money to deal with." Greer finished grimly, thinking of her own recent experience. Plus a ready-made excuse about everything being related to their famous dog. She pulled out her phone, scrolling through recent news articles about Braddock Ranch. There were dozens of them, all focused on Bluebell's pregnancy and the miracle of a 25-year-old dog having puppies. None of them questioned the strange comings and goings of other animals, or the increased security around certain areas of the property. "The question is," Clemency said, watching Greer's face carefully, "what are you going to do about it?" Greer set down her tea, barely touched. "First, I need proof. Real proof, not just suspicions. Those dead coyotes might help. If they were poisoned or drugged, it'll show up in the lab tests. And that pup in Bluebell's litter, if I could get a DNA sample." "Be careful," Clemency warned. "You've already seen what Braddock can do when he feels threatened. If you're right about this being bigger than just Bluebell, he'll go to even greater lengths to keep it quiet." "I know," Greer said, standing to pace the small living room. "But I can't just ignore this. It's not just about illegal wildlife handling anymore. Those dead coyotes, the way they're using Bluebell as a cover. How many other animals are suffering because of this operation?" She paused by Clemency's window, looking out at the morning sun now fully risen over the town. Somewhere out there, Bluebell lay nursing a litter that included at least 1 stolen coyote pup, while its dead parents were being transported to a lab for testing. The scope of what she'd stumbled upon was daunting, but she couldn't walk away. "I need to talk to Harlan again," she decided. "If we can prove those coyotes were deliberately killed, it gives us a starting point. And I need to find a way to document that pup's true identity without tipping our hand." Clemency rose to stand beside her, placing a supportive hand on her arm. "Use my house as your base of operations if you need to. Braddock may own half this town, but he doesn't own me. And he knows better than to try pushing around the woman who taught his children their ABCs." Greer managed a small smile at that. "Thanks, Clemency. I might take you up on that offer sooner rather than later. Something tells me this is going to get messier before it gets better." As if to prove her point, her phone buzzed with another message from Harlan. Lab results rushed. Traces of sedatives found in coyote tissue samples. Someone drugged them. Greer showed the message to Clemency, her jaw set with determination. "And there's our first piece of real evidence. Whatever Braddock's running behind Bluebell's spotlight, we're going to expose it." She gathered her things, mind already racing with next steps. The planted coyote pup was the key, living proof of whatever operation Braddock was hiding behind his PR campaign. She just had to figure out how to protect both it and Bluebell while gathering enough evidence to bring the truth to light. As she headed for her truck, another text came through from Harlan. More reports coming in. Similar coyote deaths reported in neighboring counties, all near Braddock-owned properties. The pattern was becoming clearer, but it only raised more questions. How big was this operation? How many other animals had been taken, traded, or killed under the cover of Bluebell's fame? And most importantly, how could they stop it before more damage was done? Greer started her engine, already planning her next move. She had allies now, Harlan with his official capacity, Clemency with her sharp mind and respected position in the community. They would need both, along with concrete evidence, to have any hope of standing against whatever Braddock was hiding behind his famous dog's story. The truth about that coyote pup in Bluebell's litter wasn't just about one switched animal anymore. It was the thread that, when pulled, might unravel something much darker happening right under everyone's noses. And Greer was determined to keep pulling until the whole truth came to light, no matter the cost. The morning sunlight filtered through the dusty windows of Clemency Rowe's cozy living room, where three determined individuals huddled around a coffee table strewn with papers. Greer Larkin sat cross-legged on the floor, her auburn hair tied back in a messy bun as she sorted through veterinary records. Harlan East occupied the worn armchair, his animal control badge catching occasional glints of light as he reviewed documentation on his tablet. Clemency, their retired teacher ally, peered through her reading glasses at a stack of microchip registration forms. "This doesn't add up," Greer muttered, spreading out several medical records. According to these files, Bluebell received her first vaccinations in 2008, but Braddock claims she was born in 2003. Harlan leaned forward, his weathered face creasing with concern. "And look at these microchip records. The original chip number doesn't match what's in the current database. It's like someone created a whole new identity for her." Clemency adjusted her glasses, her fingers tracing along lines of text. "As a teacher, I spotted plenty of forged notes in my day. These documents? They've got all the telltale signs. Inconsistent dates, varying letterheads, even the font changes between pages." Greer felt her heart racing as the evidence mounted. He's been falsifying records to make Bluebell appear older than she really is. The world's oldest dog title is a complete fraud. "Not just fraud," Harlan added grimly. "It's animal exploitation. Making an elderly dog breed repeatedly for publicity? That's abuse, plain and simple." The trio spent hours meticulously documenting every discrepancy they found. Clemency created detailed spreadsheets, her years of organizing student records proving invaluable. Greer photographed every suspicious document with her phone, while Harlan made official notes as an animal control officer. "We need to see those kennels," Greer declared, standing up to stretch her stiff muscles. "A proper welfare check by the book." Harlan nodded slowly. "I can arrange it. As animal control, I have the authority to inspect any breeding facility after filing the proper paperwork. But Braddock won't make it easy." "When has he ever?" Clemency quipped, but her tone carried worry rather than humor. They planned the inspection carefully over the next few days, making sure every detail followed proper protocol. Harlan filed the necessary paperwork, scheduling the welfare check for the following Tuesday morning. Greer gathered her medical equipment, preparing to document any health concerns they might discover. But Braddock wasn't about to let them proceed unopposed. The first attack came on Monday evening. Greer was driving her old van home from the grocery store, bags of cat food rattling in the back for her rescue fosters. The road was quiet, winding through the countryside with golden fields stretching out on either side. In her rearview mirror, she noticed a black pickup truck approaching fast. Too fast. The truck swerved into her lane, its chrome grille filling her mirror. Greer's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel as she pressed the accelerator, but her van was no match for the powerful truck. The vehicle rammed her back bumper, sending her van fishtailing. Greer fought for control, her heart pounding as she struggled to keep the van on the road. The truck struck again, harder this time. The van spun, tires screaming against asphalt. Everything blurred into a sickening whirl of motion before the van slid into the ditch with a bone-jarring crash. When the world stopped spinning, Greer sat trembling, hands still clenched on the wheel. The black truck was nowhere to be seen. She fumbled for her phone with shaking fingers, calling both the police and Harlan. This was no accident, she told them both. That truck deliberately ran me off the road. The police took statements, but without a license plate number or clear description of the driver, they could do little. Harlan arrived quickly, his face dark with anger as he helped arrange for a tow truck. "This is just the beginning," he warned. "Braddock's showing his true colors now." Greer made it home late that night, exhausted and sore. Her apartment building was quiet, most windows dark. She climbed the stairs to her third-floor unit, fishing for her keys, and stopped dead. Her door stood slightly ajar, splintered around the lock. Heart in her throat, she backed away slowly and called the police again. When they arrived, they found her apartment completely ransacked. Drawers dumped, furniture overturned, papers scattered everywhere. Her laptop was missing, along with the external hard drive containing her case notes and photos. "They're trying to destroy our evidence," she realized, surveying the chaos of her home. "But they're too late. We've already backed everything up." The next morning, Clemency found a dead coyote pup on her front porch, a clear message. Harlan received anonymous calls threatening to expose manufactured complaints about his work conduct, but none of them backed down. "We're close," Greer told her allies as they regrouped in Clemency's kitchen. "Braddock wouldn't be fighting this hard if we weren't about to expose something big." Clemency set out fresh coffee and her homemade banana bread, her hand steady despite the threats. "In all my years teaching, I learned one thing. Bullies push hardest when they're most afraid." "And we've got him running scared," Harlan agreed, spreading out a map of Braddock's property. "Tomorrow's inspection is still on. We do this by the book, document everything, and let the truth speak for itself." They spent the rest of the day preparing, making multiple copies of all their evidence and storing them in secure locations. Greer crashed on Clemency's couch that night, her apartment still uninhabitable. Sleep came fitfully, punctuated by every small noise and creak. Morning arrived with steely determination. Greer checked her phone to find threatening text messages from unknown numbers. "Back off or else. Last warning. Accidents happen." She deleted them all. "Ready?" Harlan asked as they pulled up to Braddock's front gates in his official vehicle. Greer patted her medical kit and nodded. "Ready." The gates swung open, and they drove onto Braddock's property. Time to uncover the truth, no matter what it cost. They had come too far to back down now. At the main office, Braddock himself waited for them, his expensive boots gleaming and his smile sharp as a knife. "Officer East, Ms. Larkin. To what do I owe this official visit?" "Routine welfare inspection," Harlan replied calmly, presenting the paperwork. "We'll need to see all your kennels and breeding records." Of course. Braddock's smile never wavered, but his eyes were cold. "Though I must say it's quite inconvenient timing. Perhaps we could reschedule." "The notice was properly filed," Greer stated firmly. "We're here now, and we're going to complete this inspection." Braddock's facade cracked slightly, a flash of anger crossing his face before he controlled it. "Very well, follow me." As they walked toward the kennel buildings, Greer couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Shadows seemed to move at the corner of her vision. Her bruises from the car accident ached, reminding her of what Braddock was capable of. The kennels appeared spotless, too spotless, as if they'd been hastily cleaned. But Greer's trained eye caught subtle signs. Stress marks on doors where dogs had scratched repeatedly. Worn spots on floors that spoke of endless pacing. the lingering smell of illness beneath the harsh cleaning chemicals. "Where's Bluebell?" she asked, noting the champion dog's absence. "Resting," Braddock replied smoothly. "She's not to be disturbed. As a welfare check, we need to see all animals on the premises," Harlan insisted. A tense standoff followed, but legally Braddock had no choice. They found Bluebell in an isolated back kennel, looking frail and exhausted. The elderly dog's eyes were clouded, her coat dull. She barely lifted her head when they entered. Greer's heart ached as she examined the dog. "She needs immediate veterinary care. Her condition is severely compromised." "My private vet sees to all her needs," Braddock snapped. "The same vet whose records don't match." Greer challenged, standing her ground despite his looming presence. "The ones that magically make her 5 years older than she really is." Braddock's face darkened. "You're treading on dangerous ground, Ms. Larkin." "I've tried to be patient with your accusations, but my tolerance has limits." "Is that a threat?" Harlan stepped forward. "Like the truck that ran Ms. Larkin off the road, or the break-in at her apartment?" "I have no idea what you're talking about." Braddock smiled again, all teeth. "But accidents do happen. Properties get vandalized. It would be a shame if more incidents occurred." "Everything you're doing is documented," Greer declared. "The falsified records, the breeding exploitation, all of it. You can't intimidate us into silence." "We'll see about that." Braddock's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "You have no idea what you're dealing with. Walk away now, while you still can." But Greer stood her ground, Harlan beside her, as they completed their inspection. They documented every violation, every concerning detail, building their case piece by piece. When they finally left Braddock's property, the sun was setting and tensions were at a breaking point. "He's not going to stop," Harlan warned as they drove away. "Those threats weren't empty." "I know," Greer replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "But neither are we. The truth about Bluebell and his whole operation needs to come out." They had the evidence now, proof of age falsification, breeding exploitation, and medical negligence. But getting that evidence into the right hands would be another battle entirely. Braddock had already shown how far he would go to protect his secrets. Back at Clemency's house, they found their elderly ally had been busy making calls to her own network of contacts, former students now working in local media, animal welfare organizations, and law offices. "We're not in this alone," she reminded them, serving up fresh coffee and comfort food. "The truth has a way of coming out, no matter how hard people try to bury it." Greer looked at her allies, the principled animal control officer, the determined retired teacher, and thought of Bluebell, still trapped in that back kennel. They had all risked so much already, but the fight wasn't over. "Tomorrow we start getting this evidence to everyone who needs to see it," she declared. "Braddock can threaten us all he wants, but he can't silence the truth forever." The evening light faded as they continued working, preparing their case against one of the most powerful men in the county. Outside, shadows lengthened and the wind whispered through trees. But inside, determination burned bright as 3 unlikely allies stood firm against corruption and cruelty, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges and new chances for justice. As Clemency Rowe sifted through another stack of dusty archive boxes in her dimly lit home office, her sharp green eyes caught something peculiar. The retired biology teacher adjusted her spectacles, leaning closer to examine a set of registry documents that seemed oddly out of place. "Greer, dear," she called out, her voice tight with controlled excitement. "Come look at this." Greer Larkin, who had been reviewing veterinary records at the kitchen table, hurried over. Her face showed the strain of recent days, the threatening phone calls, her ransacked apartment, and the terrifying moment when her van had been forced off the road. But determination still burned in her eyes. "What did you find?" Greer asked, peering over Clemency's shoulder at the yellowed papers. "These are the original breeding registry documents for Braddock's kennel," Clemency explained, spreading several papers across her desk. I called in a favor from an old colleague who works in records. Look at the dates. Greer's eyes widened as she studied the documents. But this shows Bluebell was registered as a breeding female in 2018. That's impossible if she's supposedly the world's oldest dog. Exactly. Clemency pulled out more papers, laying them in chronological order. I found registration documents for multiple Bluebells over the past 15 years, different microchip numbers, different birth dates, but all carefully maintained under the same public story. Harlan East, who had been quietly observing from the doorway, stepped forward. Are you saying Braddock's been switching dogs? Not just switching them, Clemency said, her voice growing more animated as she connected the pieces. He's been using younger surrogate dams for breeding while maintaining the fiction of a single miraculous elderly dog. The current Bluebell isn't ancient at all. She's probably no more than 6 or 7 years old. Greer sank into a nearby chair, her mind racing. That's why the medical records never quite matched up. They've been mixing and matching documentation from different dogs, all while presenting them as one legendary animal. The perfect cover, Harlan muttered, running a hand through his graying hair. Who would question anything happening at the home of the world's oldest dog? The media attention, the constant stream of feel-good stories, it's all been smoke and mirrors. Clemency nodded grimly. And that's not all. Look at these kennel inspection reports. She pulled out another set of documents. The numbers don't match. There are consistently more puppies being sold than could possibly come from their registered breeding stock. Unless they're bringing in dogs from somewhere else. Greer said slowly, the pieces clicking into place. Or wildlife. The coyote pup in Bluebell's litter wasn't a one-time thing, was it? Not likely, Harlan confirmed, his expression darkening. Those dead coyotes we found near Braddock's land, they weren't random casualties. They were probably trapped females with pups. Take the pups young enough, mix them in with domestic litters. And who's going to notice a few extra puppies when everyone's focused on the miracle of the world's oldest dog having a litter? Greer finished, feeling sick to her stomach. Clemency pulled out a calculator, her fingers moving swiftly over the keys. Based on these sales records and breeding documents, I estimate they've been placing at least 20 to 30 coyote pups per year into their puppy pipeline, probably selling them as exotic designer crossbreeds. All while using Bluebell's fame as cover? Greer said, her voice tight with anger. No wonder they were so desperate to keep me quiet about that coyote pup. One exposed pup could unravel their whole operation. The room fell silent as the full weight of the discovery settled over them. Years of careful deception, layers of falsified records, all built around the heartwarming story of a record-breaking dog that never actually existed. We need to document everything, Harlan said finally, pulling out his phone to take photos of the evidence. Every inconsistency, every forged record, every mismatched date. And we need to move fast if they realize we've figured this out. They already know we're close, Greer reminded them, unconsciously rubbing her shoulder that was still sore from the car incident. That's why they're escalating their threats. Clemency began methodically organizing the documents into clear evidence folders. We'll need to be careful how we proceed. Braddock has powerful friends, and this revelation won't just expose criminal activity, it'll embarrass a lot of people who've promoted Bluebell's story, including several prominent veterinarians who must have helped falsify records. Greer added, thinking of her own suspension from the clinic. No wonder they were so quick to turn against me. As they worked to organize their evidence, Greer's thoughts kept returning to the real Bluebell, not the legend, but the actual dog she'd helped through labor. A dog who had been used as nothing more than a prop in an elaborate scheme, forced to breed well past the age when it was safe or healthy. We need to think about protecting the animals too, she said suddenly. Once this breaks, what happens to all the dogs at Braddock's kennel? And the current Bluebell? Harlan nodded thoughtfully. I'll start making arrangements with legitimate rescue organizations. We'll need to have a plan in place for every animal on that property. First things first, Clemency interrupted, holding up a particularly damning set of documents. We need to get all of this somewhere safe. Multiple copies, multiple locations, if anything happens to any of us. Already on it, Harlan said, finishing his photo documentation. I've got a secure cloud storage account, and I'm sending copies to trusted colleagues in other jurisdictions. They worked late into the night, carefully building their case. Each new document they examined revealed another layer of deception. Vaccination records that didn't align with claimed birth dates, show ribbons won by different dogs, all presented as achievements of a single animal, carefully staged photos that used similar-looking dogs to maintain the illusion of one aging celebrity pet. Look at this, Greer said, holding up a veterinary report. The dental patterns are completely different between these two examinations, supposedly of the same dog, just months apart. They didn't even try to match them. They probably never expected anyone to look this closely, Clemency observed, making another note in her growing file. The story was too good, too heartwarming for people to question. Who wants to be the skeptic challenging the world's oldest dog? The weight of their discovery pressed heavily on them all. This wasn't just about illegal wildlife trafficking anymore. It was about years of systematic deception that had fooled millions of people. Major media outlets had run stories about Bluebell. Children had written school reports about her. She had been held up as an inspiration, a miracle, a symbol of endurance and hope. We need to be prepared for backlash, Harlan warned, his expression serious. People don't like having their cherished beliefs challenged. Some will refuse to accept the truth even when presented with evidence. Then we'll make the evidence irrefutable, Clemency declared, her teacher's determination showing through. Every claim, every date, every inconsistency, documented and verified multiple ways. As they continued their work, the night deepened around them. The street outside grew quiet, but inside Clemency's house, the truth was finally coming to light. The legend of Bluebell, the world's oldest dog, was unraveling thread by thread, revealing a darker story underneath, one of greed, deception, and the exploitation of innocent animals. The evidence they had gathered painted a clear picture. Braddock's entire operation was built on lies. The miracle birth that had drawn Greer into this situation was no miracle at all, just another calculated breeding event, using a younger dog while maintaining the fiction of the elderly Bluebell. The coyote pup she had noticed wasn't a fluke or a mistake. It was part of a systematic operation to launder wild animals through seemingly legitimate breeding programs. We need to move quickly now, Harlan said, checking his watch. Once we start making official reports, Braddock will know exactly what we've found, and if he's willing to run someone off the road just to protect part of this secret, he'll be desperate when he realizes we can expose all of it. Greer finished, remembering the terrifying moment when her van had spun out of control. But we can't back down now. Not when we know what's really happening to these animals. Clemency placed a supportive hand on Greer's shoulder. We'll be careful, but we'll see this through. Sometimes doing the right thing means facing dangerous people who've gotten too comfortable with their lies. They worked through their final preparations, knowing that tomorrow would bring a confrontation that would change everything. The truth about Bluebell was about to come out, and with it, the exposure of a scheme that had fooled the world while exploiting innocent animals for profit. As they finished organizing their evidence, Greer thought about the real Bluebell, not the legend, but the tired, overbred dog she had helped through labor. Soon, she promised silently, that dog would be free from her role in this deception. Soon, the truth would finally set her free. Dawn broke over Clemency's kitchen table, where maps and documents covered every surface. Harlan spread out the glossy invitation to Braddock's upcoming gala, his finger tracing the elaborate script. "This heritage line showcases our chance," he said, reaching for his phone. "I've got contacts at the state level who need to see this. With this many violations, we can get a warrant." Greer's phone buzzed, a text from one of the stable hands she'd befriended. Her face went pale. Bluebell's in trouble. She's hemorrhaging." "You can't go back there," Clemency protested. "It's too dangerous." But Greer was already grabbing her medical kit. "She'll die without help." "I have to try." The pre-dawn darkness gave her cover as she slipped onto Braddock's property. Her heart pounded as she crept past the security cameras she'd mapped during her previous visit. The barn door creaked softly as she eased it open. Bluebell lay in her pen, blood pooling beneath her. The elderly dog's eyes were glazed with pain. Greer dropped to her knees beside her, quickly assessing the situation. Postpartum hemorrhage. Serious, but treatable if she acted fast. A low growl stopped her heart. One of Braddock's guard dogs had spotted her. The massive animal stalked forward, hackles raised. Greer forced herself to stay still, speaking in low, soothing tones while keeping one hand on Bluebell's pulse. The guard dog lunged. Greer rolled, barely avoiding its snapping jaws. She scrambled behind a stack of hay bales, her medical kit clutched to her chest. The dog circled, searching for an opening. Time was running out for Bluebell. Greer could see the dog growing weaker. Making a split-second decision, she grabbed a handful of treats from her pocket, always prepared for nervous animals, and tossed them far across the barn. The guard dog hesitated, then chased after them. Greer raced back to Bluebell. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency as she administered medication and worked to stop the bleeding. "Stay with me, girl," she whispered, monitoring vital signs. "Just stay with me." Minutes stretched like hours. Gradually, Bluebell's condition stabilized. Her breathing steadied and the bleeding slowed. Greer checked the puppies next. They were weak but alive, needing their mother's care. The guard dog had finished the treats and was returning, still suspicious but less aggressive. Greer maintained her calm demeanor as she finished treating Bluebell, speaking softly to both dogs. Sometimes, she reflected, saving a life meant facing your fears and trusting your training, no matter how dangerous the situation. As the first rays of sunlight crept through the barn windows, Greer knew she had to leave before the morning staff arrived. She gave Bluebell one final check, satisfied that the crisis had passed. The elderly dog's tail wagged weakly, a small gesture of trust that meant everything. The early morning sky bloomed orange and pink as the dozens of vehicles converged silently on Braddock Ranch. Police cruisers, animal control vans, and state wildlife service trucks formed a coordinated line along the property's perimeter. Greer's heart pounded as she watched from her position beside Harlan's truck, her hands clutching her medical kit. "Remember," Harlan whispered, checking his radio, "stay behind the officers until they clear each building. We don't know what we're walking into." Greer nodded, though every fiber of her being wanted to rush in and help the animals she knew were suffering inside. The past weeks of gathering evidence, building their case, and coordinating with authorities had led to this moment. She watched as tactical teams took their positions, their movements precise and practiced. At exactly 6 o'clock, the raid began. Commands echoed across the property as officers moved in, their voices sharp and authoritative. "Search warrant! Police!" The sound of doors being breached cut through the morning quiet. Greer followed Harlan and the animal control team toward the main barn. Inside, they found exactly what their investigation had suggested: hidden kennels concealed behind false walls. The space reeked of fear and neglect. Cages stretched in long rows, many containing coyotes and other wildlife trapped for illegal breeding operations. "Over here!" called one of the officers. "We've got drugs, lots of them." A cabinet revealed vials of unauthorized veterinary medications, hormones used to force breeding cycles, and containers of livestock dye, the same kind Greer had noticed on the coyote pup weeks ago. In the office, another team discovered multiple sets of ledgers, one for public view, others hidden in a false bottom drawer showing the true scope of Braddock's operation. The numbers revealed years of illegal wildlife trafficking masked behind the facade of legitimate breeding. "This is it," Harlan said, his voice tight with emotion. "This is everything we needed." For a brief, shining moment, victory seemed complete. But then Greer heard shouting from outside. Through the barn's open door, she saw Braddock being led away in handcuffs, but there was something in his expression that made her blood run cold. Not defeat, but satisfaction. "Fire!" The cry came from the direction of the north pasture. "Structure fire at the secondary kennel." Greer's head snapped up. The secondary kennel, where they'd tracked several suspicious shipments. He had someone waiting to torch it. She realized aloud. He's destroying evidence. She ran outside, following the plume of black smoke rising against the morning sky. The small outbuilding was already engulfed in flames, its wooden structure feeding the fire's hunger. Then she heard it. A sound that stopped her heart. A high-pitched, terrified cry coming from inside the burning building. "There's still animals in there!" she shouted, already running toward the flames. "Greer, stop!" Harlan's voice called after her. "Fire department's on the way." But she couldn't wait. That cry, she recognized it. It was a coyote pup, probably one of the illegally captured ones they'd been investigating. The sound spoke directly to her soul, awakening every protective instinct she possessed. The heat hit her like a wall as she reached the building's entrance. Smoke burned her eyes and throat, but she pressed forward, pulling her shirt up over her nose. The structure's interior was a maze of orange flames and thick black smoke. Beams crackled ominously overhead. "Where are you?" she called out, dropping low to avoid the worst of the smoke. The frightened cry came again, from her left. She crawled forward, feeling her way along the floor. The heat was intense, sweat pouring down her face. A support beam crashed down behind her, sending sparks flying. The sound of splintering wood filled the air as the building's structure began to fail. But Greer kept moving, following those desperate cries. Finally, she reached a metal cage tucked against the far wall. Inside, a small coyote pup cowered, its eyes wide with terror. The cage's latch was hot to the touch, but Greer ignored the pain as she worked it open. The pup tried to retreat from her hands, but there was nowhere to go. "I've got you," she whispered, gathering the trembling creature against her chest. "I've got you." The return journey was a nightmare of heat and falling debris. Another beam crashed down, missing her by inches. The smoke was so thick she could barely see, relying on memory and instinct to find her way back to the entrance. Her lungs burned with every breath. Just when she thought she couldn't go another step, fresh air hit her face. She stumbled out of the building, coughing violently, still clutching the pup to her chest. Hands grabbed her, pulling her further from the flames. She heard voices shouting, felt someone trying to take the pup from her arms. "No," she managed between coughs. "I need to check for injuries." "Let the paramedics check you first," Harlan insisted, his face drawn with worry. But his expression softened as he looked at the tiny creature she'd rescued. "You crazy, brave woman." Emergency personnel swarmed around them. Someone draped a blanket over her shoulders and pressed an oxygen mask to her face. Through it all, Greer kept one hand on the pup, who had stopped struggling and now pressed against her, trembling. As she watched, fire trucks arrived and began battling the blaze, but it was clear the building and any evidence it contained was lost. Still, looking down at the frightened but very much alive pup in her arms, Greer knew she'd saved something far more valuable than papers or ledgers. The sun climbed higher in the sky as the raid continued around them. Teams of veterinarians and animal control officers worked to document and care for the dozens of animals found in the main complex. Every cage, every animal, every piece of evidence was photographed and catalogued. Paramedics insisted on taking Greer to the hospital for smoke inhalation, but she refused to leave until she'd examined the pup. Her throat was raw and her hands shook, but her touch remained gentle as she checked the small creature for injuries. "Just scared and a little dehydrated," she reported finally, her voice hoarse. "No burns." She looked up at Harlan, who hadn't left her side. "We did it, didn't we?" "Even if he destroyed some evidence, we got enough to stop him." Harlan nodded, his expression grim but satisfied. More than enough. Between the drugs, the false records, and all these animals, he gestured at the ongoing activity around them. "Braddock's empire is finished. As if to punctuate his words, they watched as officers led away several of Braddock's employees in handcuffs, the ones who'd helped maintain his illegal operation. The morning's beautiful sunrise had given way to a clear, bright day that seemed to mirror the truth finally being brought to light. The pup in Greer's arms had stopped shaking and now watched the activity with alert eyes, occasionally glancing up at her face as if checking that she was still there. Despite her scorched clothes, smoke-stained skin, and aching lungs, Greer felt a profound sense of peace. This was why she'd refused to back down, why she'd fought against all of Braddock's threats and intimidation. For moments like this, when she could make a real difference in an animal's life. The Wildlife Rehabilitation Center is sending someone, Harlan told her, watching the pup. They'll make sure it gets proper care and eventually returns to the wild. Greer nodded, though her arms tightened slightly around the pup. She knew that was best. This was a wild animal, not a pet. But she felt uniquely connected to this small survivor, this living proof that standing up against cruelty and corruption was always worth the risk. The raid continued throughout the morning, revealing more evidence of Braddock's extensive operation with each passing hour. But nothing they found in the intact buildings could match the significance of what Greer had saved from the flames. Not just evidence of wrongdoing, but an innocent life that represented everything she'd been fighting for. The courtroom felt suffocating as Greer watched Braddock's high-powered legal team methodically tear apart their case. The lead attorney, a sharp-featured woman in an expensive suit, stood before the judge with an air of absolute confidence. "Your Honor, we move to dismiss all evidence obtained during the raid. The warrant was based on speculation and hearsay." Her voice carried through the silent courtroom. "Furthermore, my client's property was damaged and confidential business records were compromised." Greer's stomach twisted as she watched the judge nodding thoughtfully. Beside her, Harlan's jaw clenched. One by one, their carefully gathered pieces of evidence were challenged, their chain of custody questioned, their methods scrutinized. The alleged wildlife violations cannot be proven. Braddock's lawyer continued. Any unusual animals found on the property were clearly marked as legally obtained through proper channels. My client runs a legitimate breeding operation. Back at the clinic that evening, Greer received devastating news. The veterinary board had suspended her license pending investigation into professional misconduct. Her hands shook as she read the formal letter. Without her license, she couldn't even help the animals still in their care from the raid. Worse still, Bluebell's condition had taken a sharp turn for the worse. The elderly dog lay listlessly in her kennel at the shelter, refusing food and growing weaker by the hour. The stress of the raid and subsequent moves had been too much for her fragile system. "Her vital signs are dropping," Dr. Martinez said softly, reviewing the latest readings. "The infection's getting worse, and she's not responding to the antibiotics like we hoped." Greer sat beside Bluebell's kennel, gently stroking her thinning fur. "Don't give up, sweet girl," she whispered. "We've come too far to lose you now." The sound of boots on concrete made her look up. Jeb Calder, Braddock's longtime ranch foreman, stood in the doorway. His weathered face was drawn with tension, and his usual confident stance was replaced by something more uncertain. "Miss Larkin?" His voice was gruff. "Got a minute to talk?" Greer hesitated, remembering how Jeb had always followed Braddock's orders without question, but something in his expression made her nod. They stepped outside into the cool evening air. "I can't do it anymore," Jeb said suddenly, staring at the ground. "Been working that ranch 23 years. Told myself I was just doing my job, following orders. But what he did today in that courtroom..." He shook his head. "Using those fancy lawyers to twist everything around, making honest folks look like liars." "You know what really happened," Greer said quietly. "Course I do. I helped build those hidden kennels, helped move those animals around at night, kept my mouth shut when things didn't feel right." His calloused hands clenched. "But watching him sit there smirking while they called you a liar, that was the last straw." Hope flickered in Greer's chest. Are you saying there's proof? Real proof, the kind those lawyers can't talk their way around. Jeb glanced over his shoulder. In the old grain silo behind the north pasture. Braddock converted it years ago, made it his private office. That's where he keeps all the real records, breeding logs, sale receipts, everything. Even got security cameras in there, recording everything that happens on the property. Greer's mind raced. Why are you telling me this? Because it ain't right what he's doing. To the animals, to you, to all of us who worked there believing his lies. Jeb pulled a key from his pocket. This opens the side door. The evidence is in a safe behind his desk. Combination's my start date, 8/15/99. But you didn't get this from me. As Jeb turned to leave, Greer called after him. Why now? After all these years? He paused. My daddy taught me there's two kinds of loyalty. The kind you earn through respect, and the kind you buy with fear and money. Took me too long to figure out which kind Braddock was using. Greer immediately called Harlan, and within an hour they had assembled a small team, including 2 deputies and a state investigator. The old silo loomed against the darkening sky, its metal sides reflecting the last rays of sunset. Using Jeb's key, they entered quietly. The interior had indeed been converted into an office, with expensive furniture and modern equipment contrasting sharply with the rustic structure. Behind the massive desk, they found the safe exactly where Jeb had described. Greer's fingers trembled as she input the numbers. 81599. The safe opened with a soft click. Inside, they found everything they needed. Detailed breeding logs showed exactly how Braddock had fabricated Bluebell's age and lineage. Financial records revealed payments to corrupt officials who had helped maintain the facade. Most damning of all were the security recordings. Look at this, Harlan said, reviewing the footage. Here's Braddock himself directing the placement of that coyote pup with Bluebell's litter. And here, this shows them dyeing the animals to alter their markings. The evidence was overwhelming and, most importantly, impossible to dispute. The timestamps and security watermarks proved authenticity. Braddock's own careful record-keeping would be his undoing. They worked through the night, documenting everything. By morning, they had assembled an airtight case that not even Braddock's expensive lawyers could dismantle. The next day's hearing was dramatically different. Braddock's smug expression vanished as the new evidence was presented. His lawyers' attempts to object were overruled as the judge reviewed the irrefutable proof of their client's crimes. I think we've seen enough, the judge declared. Mr. Braddock, in light of this new evidence, I'm ordering you taken into custody immediately. Furthermore, all animals on your property are to be surrendered to state custody pending a full investigation. As officers led Braddock away, he locked eyes with Greer. Who told you about the silo? He demanded. Who betrayed me? Greer simply watched him go, honoring her promise to protect Jeb's identity. The ranch foreman stood at the back of the courtroom, nearly invisible in his worn work clothes, watching his former boss's downfall with quiet satisfaction. Later that evening, Greer returned to the shelter with wonderful news. Her license had been fully reinstated, and she had been cleared of all allegations. But her joy was tempered by concern as she hurried to Bluebell's kennel. The elderly dog was still weak, but something had changed. Perhaps it was the new antibiotics, or maybe just the lifting of a great weight, but her eyes were brighter, and she managed to wag her tail at Greer's approach. You're going to be okay now, Greer whispered, settling beside her. We all are. The truth finally came out. Dr. Martinez appeared with updated blood work results. Her numbers are improving, she announced. I think she's turned a corner. Greer hugged Bluebell gently, feeling tears of relief spring to her eyes. After weeks of darkness and uncertainty, light had finally broken through. Justice had been served not just for Bluebell, but for all the animals who had suffered under Braddock's cruel regime. Thank you, came a quiet voice. Jeb stood in the doorway again, his hat in his hands. For keeping your word about me. Thank you for having the courage to do the right thing, Greer replied. He nodded, a slight smile softening his weathered features. Reckon sometimes it takes a while to find your conscience, but better late than never. As Greer watched him go, she reflected on how change often comes from unexpected sources. Jeb's decision to stand up against years of wrongdoing had provided the key they needed to unlock the truth. Sometimes, she thought, the biggest acts of courage come quietly, in moments when someone simply decides they can't stay silent any longer. Bluebell sighed contentedly beside her, finally resting easy. The elderly dog had become a symbol of resilience, surviving not just the physical hardships she'd endured, but emerging from a web of lies to find peace and honest care at last. The nightmare was over. Braddock's empire of deception had crumbled, brought down not by force or confrontation, but by one man's awakened conscience and the determination of those who refused to look away from injustice. As the evening settled around them, Greer felt a deep sense of rightness settle in her heart. Sometimes the darkest moments truly do come just before dawn. Dawn crept over Braddock Ranch, painting the weathered silo in shades of amber and rust. Greer Larkin crouched behind her pickup truck, her heart pounding against her ribs as she watched Harlan East position himself behind a stack of hay bales. The morning air felt sharp in her lungs, carrying the familiar scents of hay and livestock that now seemed tainted by everything they'd uncovered. "Remember the plan," Harlan whispered through their shared radio earpiece. "We get in, secure the evidence, and get out. No heroics." Greer nodded, though she knew he couldn't see her. The rescued coyote pup whimpered softly from its carrier in her truck, and she reached back to gentle it through the wire door. "Stay quiet, little one," she murmured. "We're going to make this right." The silo loomed before them, its metal walls hiding the truth they desperately needed. According to Jeb Calder, the ranch foreman who'd finally turned against his boss, this particular structure contained more than just feed and grain. Hidden compartments held years of falsified breeding records, trafficking logs, and surveillance footage that would expose Braddock's entire operation. Greer checked her watch. 5:30 in the morning. The ranch hands wouldn't start their morning routines for another half hour. This was their window. She took a deep breath and moved forward, keeping low as she crossed the open space between her truck and the silo's entrance. The padlock on the door had already been removed by Jeb the night before, replaced with one that looked identical, but would open with the key now clutched in her palm. The metal door creaked slightly as she eased it open, making her wince. Harlan's footsteps whispered behind her as he provided backup. The interior was dark, lit only by thin streams of dawn light filtering through gaps in the metal sheeting. "Second panel to the right of the grain chute," Greer whispered, remembering Jeb's instructions. "There should be a hidden latch." The sound of a shotgun being cocked froze her in place. "Well, well," Orson Braddock's voice echoed in the confined space. "Seems like my security system caught more than just coyotes this morning." A beam of light from his flashlight cut through the darkness, forcing Greer to squint. Braddock stood on the upper catwalk, shotgun trained steadily on her chest. His expensive western suit looked out of place in the dusty silo, but his expression was pure predator. "Step away from that wall, Miss Larkin," he commanded. "Hands where I can see them." Greer raised her hands slowly, mind racing. Harlan had slipped into the shadows. Braddock hadn't spotted him yet. She needed to keep his attention focused on her. "You know why we're here," she said, forcing her voice to remain steady. "It's over, Mr. Braddock. We know everything about Bluebell, about the falsified records, about the wildlife trafficking." Braddock's laugh was cold. "Know everything? You don't know anything, girl. What you have are theories and coincidences. What I have is influence, money, and the best lawyers in 3 states. And a shotgun," Greer added, taking a careful step forward. "Doesn't that seem like overkill for a veterinary nurse?" "Insurance," he replied smoothly. "Against trespassers who might damage my property or steal my intellectual assets. Now, I'll give you one chance to walk away from this. Your career might even survive, if you're smart about it." Greer felt a bead of sweat roll down her spine, but she held his gaze. "Let's talk about that. about careers and reputations. She reached slowly into her jacket pocket, telegraphing her movements. I brought something that might interest you. Don't move. Braddock barked, but curiosity tinged his voice. It's just papers, she said calmly, withdrawing a folded document. A statement. Saying I was wrong about everything, that I made assumptions and accusations without proof, that Bluebell really is the miracle dog you claim she is. Braddock's eyes narrowed. Go on, I'll sign it. Right here, right now, in exchange for the coyote pup. Greer kept her voice level, reasonable. You can keep your empire, your reputation. I'll disappear, find work in another state. All I want is that one pup. The coyote? Braddock scoffed, but she saw the calculation in his eyes. That mongrel's worth nothing. Then it shouldn't be hard to give it up. Greer pressed. Think about it. You get rid of me, keep your story intact, and all it costs you is one illegal animal you shouldn't have anyway. She could see him weighing the options, the shotgun lowering slightly as he considered her offer. That tiny movement was all Harlan needed. He emerged from the shadows like a ghost, years of ranch work and animal control training evident in his swift, sure movements. Before Braddock could react, Harlan had scaled the metal ladder to the catwalk and closed the distance between them. The shotgun went off with a deafening boom, but Harlan had already knocked it upward, the shot punching harmlessly through the silo's roof. They grappled briefly, but Harlan's superior strength and leverage won out. The shotgun clattered to the catwalk as Braddock found himself pinned against the railing. Greer now, Harlan called out, struggling to maintain his hold on the larger man. She didn't waste a second, rushing to the wall panel Jeb had described. The hidden latch was right where he said it would be, cleverly disguised as a structural bolt. The panel swung open to reveal a small room filled with filing cabinets and computer equipment. No, Braddock roared, renewing his struggle against Harlan's grip. You have no right! This is private property. This is evidence, Greer corrected, pulling out her phone to document everything before touching it. The first file cabinet yielded exactly what they'd suspected. Breeding records showing multiple dogs being passed off as Bluebell over the years, maintaining the illusion of a single record-breaking canine. The computer contained even more damning proof. Videos from motion-activated cameras showed Braddock's men setting illegal snares throughout the property, capturing coyotes and other wildlife. Spreadsheets detailed the sale of these animals to unscrupulous collectors and hunting preserves. Got it, she called out, transferring files to her phone while simultaneously texting their location to the state wildlife officers waiting nearby. It's all here. Everything Jeb told us about and more. Braddock had stopped struggling, his face ashen as he watched his carefully constructed empire crumble. You don't understand, he said, his voice suddenly old and tired. This land, this legacy, it's all I have, everything my father built. Your father built an honest ranch. Harlan cut in, securing Braddock's wrists with zip ties. You turned it into a criminal enterprise. The sound of approaching vehicles filled the air, police cruisers and wildlife service trucks. Greer continued documenting everything, her hand steady now that the danger had passed. Each piece of evidence felt like a weight lifting from her shoulders, vindication for all the threats and intimidation she'd endured. The pup, Braddock said suddenly, slumping against the railing. You were never going to make that deal, were you? Greer looked up at him, seeing not the powerful rancher who'd nearly destroyed her life, but a desperate man whose schemes had finally caught up with him. No, she admitted, because it was never about just one pup. It was about all of them, every animal you exploited, every law you broke, every person you bullied into silence. The silo's door burst open as law enforcement officers poured in, their flashlight beams cutting through the dusty air. Greer stepped back, letting them take control of the scene, secure the evidence, and lead Braddock away. She felt Harlan's warm presence beside her, his hand finding hers in the chaos. You okay? He asked softly. She nodded, watching as the morning sun streamed through the hole Braddock's shotgun had made in the roof. Better than okay. We did it. We actually did it. You did it, Harlan corrected. You never gave up, never backed down, even with a shotgun in your face. The sound of a familiar whimper drew their attention back to the entrance, where one of the officers was bringing in the carrier with the coyote pup. The little creature looked up at Greer with bright, trusting eyes that had started this whole journey when she'd first noticed them in Bluebell's whelping box. What happens now? She asked, kneeling to check on the pup. Now? Harlan smiled, watching as more officers catalogued the evidence they'd found. Now we make sure justice is served. For all of them. The next few weeks unfolded like a whirlwind. Braddock's arrest made headlines across the state, his mugshot a stark contrast to the polished rancher who'd once seemed untouchable. The charges were extensive: animal cruelty, wildlife trafficking, fraud, and attempted assault. His lawyers couldn't spin their way out of the mountain of evidence from the silo. The coyote pup, now officially dubbed Scout by the wildlife officers, was transferred to the Desert Dawn Wildlife Sanctuary. Greer visited him before the move, watching as he bounded around the temporary enclosure with restored energy. The sanctuary staff promised updates on his progress toward eventual release. The hidden surrogate dam, the real mother of Bluebell's supposed miracle litter, found a loving home with clemency. The retired teacher had plenty of time to dote on the gentle hound, who quickly settled into a life of afternoon walks and sunny porch naps. But it was Bluebell who truly blossomed under Greer's care. The elderly dog no longer had to maintain the exhausting facade of a record holder or produce litters beyond her years. Instead, she spent her days dozing in a plush bed by Greer's desk at the clinic, where the veterinary board had not only lifted her suspension, but offered her a position as lead veterinary nurse. They reviewed your case files, Dr. Martinez told her, beaming with pride. Your handling of Bluebell's case, the emergency care during the fire, it all showed exceptional skill and judgment. We'd be honored to have you head up our new animal welfare division. Greer accepted with tears in her eyes, thinking of how far she'd come from those dark days of suspension and threats. The clinic felt different now, not just a workplace, but a mission fulfilled. One evening, as she was finishing up paperwork, Harlan appeared in her doorway. He'd traded his usual uniform for casual clothes, though his smile carried the same steady warmth she'd come to depend on. Got time for dinner? He asked, then added with a touch of humor. No shotguns or burning buildings involved, I promise. Greer looked down at Bluebell, snoring softly at her feet. The old dog's face was peaceful, years of strain melted away. You know what? I think it's about time. She then gathered her things, gave Bluebell a gentle pat, and stepped toward her future. One where truth had prevailed, where her worth was recognized, and where new beginnings waited just around the corner. Bluebell lifted her head briefly to watch them go, then settled back into her bed with a contented sigh, a living symbol of everything they'd fought to protect. Thanks for watching. If any part of this story lingered with you, consider subscribing. I'll be here again tomorrow, sharing another tale that speaks to the soul.